Welcome to the City Council work session for May 7th. As you can tell, our Mayor Mark Clark is absent tonight, and I am here running the show, so let's get started. All right, so first item on our agenda is the Hunters Reserve Park Design build proposals, and I am waiting to hear with bated breath how this goes. Thank you.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council, thank you for your time tonight. We have a couple items on the work session agenda for your consideration tonight. Before we jump into it, the first one obviously is going to be the Hunters Reserve North. We've got two proposals that were submitted from two different landscaping companies. This is a design build park project south of 37th on 29th Avenue. Is where this is located. So Ty Hamer, our Parks and Recreation Director, has worked on this procurement to see what it is that this design looks like, what are the proposed costs for this. And so I'm gonna have Ty go through the proposals. So we've received two proposals from two different firms with a total of 4 concepts. So each one submitted 2 different concepts. So what we're looking for tonight is we're looking for council, if there's a preference in either proposal, or if there are specific features within the concepts that the council is interested in. Once we have that information, then we'll be able to coordinate with the desired landscape contractor to be able to move forward with this design and then ultimately construction. So Ty, if you would, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Cody. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, Council. I'm excited to be here and try to share kind of how we got to where we are right now with Hunters Reserve North. As Cody was saying, this property is on 29th Avenue. It's about, I think, 4.4 acres, has a large detention pond on about half of it. In 2023, we had $121,000 budgeted for design services, and then in 2024, we have $732,000 for construction. When I learned that both of these were on the docket for this year, I felt like this was a great project to move forward with a design build concept where we bring a team on, we work through the design with them, and move straight into the construction phase. And after discussing, with Efren a little bit about this idea, we decided to move forward with that. We went out to bid in February. We had a great turnout for our pre-bid meeting. I'm going to go one slide ahead. We actually had 18 people that showed up for our pre-bid meeting. We ended up with 3 proposals. One of them was not a qualified proposal. They didn't meet the minimum requirements of the RFP. So we actually have 2 qualified proposals. One from Western States Reclamation, which is out of Frederick. They teamed up with a company called Stream Landscaping, Landscapes, Dibble Engineering for their civil engineering, and Hydro Systems. And then we also had a proposal from Brightview Design, which is out of Denver, and they are a larger company. They actually have their own landscape development within their broader scope called Brightview Landscape. They're based out of Loveland, and then they'll be using Craft Civil Engineering and Hydro Systems as well for irrigation. I'm going to get right into the concept. So this is one of Western States' concepts. Their design estimate or their design quote is $119,455. This is the smaller of their 2 concepts as far as budget-wise. But you can see it includes a hard sidewalk, 6-foot wide hard concrete trail that connects from the neighborhood to the west to 29th Avenue. It includes some soft surface trails through more of a native area with drought tolerant grasses, a lot of trees, a lot of shrubs, shelter structure, picnic tables, and they've reserved a spot for a playground. One of the questions we had during pre-bid meeting was, is there sufficient budget for play equipment? We ended up putting that in as an option for these guys, so they weren't required to bid play equipment at this time. But they did save a spot for playground in the future. This was their other concept. It's pretty much got the same elements. You can see the play structures in a little bit different area on the site. The shelters in a little bit different area on the site. What you're gonna see from all these concepts is they're all using, correct me if I get it wrong, Cody, but that would be the, south side of the property, right? Where most of the park area is gonna be, where the work is gonna be done, because the north side is a detention area. They've all included different grass lawns, different native areas, and really hard surface and soft surface trails. This design was a little bit higher, dollar-wise. 654,000 is their estimate on that one. And I think it's important to remember this is not necessarily all about the numbers right now, because that will change as we move through design phase. And we'll bring you back a final cost if we make a selection of one of these companies. Oops, going too fast. So Brightview was the other company. I tried to share some of these pictures just so you could see, and you can see it in their proposal that I attached with my report. They took the river aspect, you know, we are the confluent of two rivers, right? And they took those wavy lines and that whole theory as in kind of their inspiration for the design. So I wanted to share that picture. They also really thought about the sun, different directions that the sun's going to hit the property. Their design's very similar. It's got a hard surface connecting trail from the neighborhood to 29th. It's got a play area. They did include play structures in their quotes. This is the bigger of their two quotes, the highest number. They've got natural play elements like boulders and logs for kids to climb on, as well as a small play structure. They have hard surface trails, shelter, hard surface trails. One thing on their design that's a little different is they are proposing possibly a walking trail around the detention pond. Not 100% sure that that's going to work construction-wise. The slopes on that pond are pretty steep, and there's not a lot of area at the top before we hit the fence line of the neighborhood. So may not work, but again, that would be something we talk about during the design aspects. This is a picture of their other option. Again, very similar. I didn't say before, but their design costs are a little lower, $99,600. This option is a little bit less at $704,000. Does not include the actual play equipment, just some natural play features. Similar though, connecting hard surface from the neighborhood to 29th, soft surface trails around the outer part of the park, a grassy lawn area surrounded by drought tolerant grasses, trees, shrubs. So I think it's important, you know, to kind of remember when we're thinking about this, not only what concepts we like, but it's important to think about what's included, what they're proposing in their budget numbers, because they are dramatically different. Brightview's included a lot of playground equipment. It's more a broader scope that they've included in their concepts compared to Western States Reclamation. Hopefully, if we can get some direction which way you'd like to go, maybe with which firm. The idea is to try to get that firm under a contract to do the design work and start working with staff and citizen input to come up with a design for this park and finalize the construction cost. And then we'll come back to council with a final construction cost, probably be a couple of 2 or 3 months, 4 months possibly, with construction starting in the fall and then finishing up in the springtime of next year. So that's our hope. I kind of went through really quick. If you'd like to look back at any of those pictures, let me know. But that's all I have. Any questions?
So for Bright, you had said that it includes some playground equipment.
Yes, so
It is playground equipment or just rocks?
they included natural features, rocks and logs, and an actual play structure. It was
So
one
there's a
of,
structure in
one of their options was a play structure, which is part of that $741,000 budget.
So, are we starting this park from scratch?
Yes,
Okay,
it
so right
is.
now, it's just a bare field with a detention pond
Yes.
already.
Yep, the north side is pretty much all detention pond. The south side is just native grasses, flat land.
So how are we proposing on watering trees? I know some of you have been around long enough to know that I have a real concern with trees.
Yeah.
We seem to plant them at great expense, and we also seem to not care for them, and then they end up having to be cut down.
Yeah, so this property will be connected to a non-pot system that is just on the east side of that. We'll actually have to go into 29th, across 29th to get to that system, but it'll be watered with non-pot. Again, these are concepts, so we're not stuck with the number of trees. We can work that out, right? Kind of like what we did in Da Vinci. Those are all conversations that we can have with the design company as we're moving forward.
So is the design company proposal then, including the price of the non-pot?
Yes, the hookup into the non-pot. Well, they're estimating costs right now, right? We will be able to bring back a much more final number as we get closer to construction.
So the difference between Western and Bright is, from my understanding, well, just looking at the numbers, the significant difference is Bright's gonna include some playground equipment, Western is not. But the difference in concept one is $126,000. Why would we not just ask Western to change their design cost to match Brightview and go with concept one with Western?
I think that's something to remember, right? I mean, we know what the budget is, and as we're working with the design companies, we could be adding elements, subtracting elements. It's gonna change and be fluid during that process.
Okay.
So I think that's Cody's point. If there's things that you like in the one concept and maybe prefer from the other concept, we can bring those to the table as we go through the design process. We did interview both of these outfits, these groups on Zoom. Efren and Curtis and I sat on a Zoom call with them. We got some pretty positive feelings from the Brightview group. They seemed very eager and anxious to work with the city. They were excited about the project. Didn't have the same feeling from Western States. But I honestly think either one of these groups is going to do a good job. They're highly qualified. Their references all checked out. I think whatever way we decide to go, we'll get a product that we hope for, and we'll get a product within budget. Will it have a, $700,000 playground or a giant playground structure? Probably not at this time, but that could be worked into future capital improvement if we wanted to.
Anybody else have any questions? Anybody like one over the other?
Well, I guess what I would like to say is I'm very concerned, being that I'm a large man already, of childhood obesity and what that's going to look like, because it's totally different than when I was a kid, and here I am looking like me now. So I would just highly encourage that whichever one we do, we have some kind of play equipment.
Well, living near a park myself, I see that the equipment is highly played on, so I think it's essential too. I also think it's essential that we have some walking paths. Everybody's walking their dogs, everybody's going for a stroll with their kids and their family, and I think that incorporating the walking paths, maybe not around the retention pond if it's not a good fit, but certainly through the park and somewhere around the park.
I really like the idea of the combination of the hard surface paths and soft surface through the outer kind of edge. I think this park's going to be important to have a buffer between the play areas and the noisy areas and the neighbors, right? So that native area gives you that buffer, and you could have a nice walking trail where people can walk their dogs and maybe not encounter obstacles the whole time.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're keeping that in mind too, having a screaming playground right
Right.
next to existing neighbors. I know that they probably right now have signed up for the nice field aspect of it.
Right.
And then to plan a park there and then have that kind of action.
It's definitely something that we talked about in the pre-bid with all the groups.
Anybody else?
I do agree. I do like having a play equipment. I think that's important, and I like where it's heading with like a path to walk. I know how many of our parks have bathrooms in the city?
That's probably a better question for what? Say it again. We have 4,
And how many parks do we have in total?
13.
13, I think.
13. Okay. Well, the reason why I think anytime I think of like a park equipment and stuff like that, I always kind of, for me, it correlates with at least a bathroom. And I know it seems as though we're steering away from bathrooms, and I understand the reason, but I also understand the fact that, especially now in the economy that we're in, people are looking for places, with their children, that they don't have to spend money and they can spend a lot more time. And so I just want to make sure that we don't steer completely away from bathrooms. And I get it, some people may use it and may not use it, but not everyone kind of follows that methodology. So I just want to ensure that we're being inclusive of everyone, and that we think about those kind of things as we continue to create more parks and invest in them.
I think it's important to remember, this will be a neighborhood park. There's not parking lot included, right? You're walking from your home to this park. That might be a determining factor on whether there's a restroom or not. If you look at, City Park has a restroom, doesn't really have parking. I was thinking, a lot of times you see restrooms where there's other amenities like tennis courts, basketball courts, events are held there, like Riverside, right? Something to think about. I do know on the one outlot that approaches the neighborhood, there is water there. So if you were to do a restroom in the future, it'd probably be right around there somewhere, because that's where you'd have to hook up to potable water and that kind of stuff.
And I know most of our parks are kind of neighborhood parks. So, I mean, if you really start thinking about it, there's not a whole lot that are like away, because they're always within neighborhoods.
Yep.
But I just want to ensure that if people, because I mean, honestly, what happens, I hear people always, especially families, oh, have you visited this park? And clearly they don't live there, and so that's what people tend to do. They like to go to specific parks depending on what amenities they have,
Right.
And it's just kind of a thing. And again, it's a thing for, cost savings for families, and a thing to do and get the kids out and also explore the city. So something I just want to bring up.
Yep. One thing I maybe should have mentioned too, that I think it's very important in all these designs, that connecting piece to the neighborhood, the outlot, is landscaped and beautified, right? Right now, it kind of looks like there's a house missing and there's a patch of weeds and a social path going through there. So that'll be a priority of either group, to dress that up with a little green grass and shrubs and those kind of things.
So you say there's a social path that goes through there.
There is already, yeah.
So can we?
Kind of see where the outlot is and the first hard sidewalk. There's kind of a social path cutting straight through that property now to 29th Street.
So can we just put a path there then? I mean, because I see this over at Riverside too, where there
Sure.
isn't a path, there's a
That's
social
where they walk.
path,
Yeah.
and that's where they're gonna walk anyway.
Yeah.
So for me, knowing that would probably be
That's a really good
place to
point.
just, that's the way you guys wanna go, there you go.
Yep. We have actually seen that used to help figure out where to put trails, to open up a property and see where people end up naturally walking.
So one other thing that comes to mind for me, and I'm more with the Brightview. I value the ability for staff to work on a friendlier basis with somebody that we're bringing in for either consulting or for construction. And if you guys have a really good feel with these people and a good rapport, I think that in the end, we end up getting a better product.
I don't want to speak for Efren and Curtis, but I feel like we felt that way with the Brightview team when we met them online. The other team, like I said, though, very professional, clearly have the skills to do the job. I don't think we would go wrong either way.
Anybody else have any questions?
So really quickly, before we start talking about preferences, the one thing that I want to get on the record is Brightview is a huge customer of my company's, but I don't get any money from that. So I can be completely not swayed because I don't benefit anyway. So I just wanted that on the record.
So I'm price sensitive, and I would prefer Western. I like the design more with Western. I'd just like to see the design costs come down. And then that would save us $126K that we can apply to our own playground equipment.
Yeah, I mean, that would be one way to do it, right? Is you, with Western States, you sort of have a built-in contingency. You could then spend what's left on playground equipment in the future.
I like the Western look too, a little bit more.
Tammy?
Yeah, and in the staff report, under Western States Reclamation, you'll see that there's a maximum of 118,846 available under Concept 1 for the play equipment. That's a maximum number. It's not saying we have to use it all. It's just what's available. And then under Concept 2, that maximum would be 79,321. So there's certainly, if Western States Reclamation is the preferred designer, then there is certainly enough pad in there to add playground equipment or play equipment. So it is available.
Thank you.
Fred, we haven't heard from you. Do you have anything you want to ask
No,
or any
no.
comments?
I think either one of them, be fine. I don't have a preference.
Anybody else have a preference?
I just don't see, I gravitate more towards Brightview just because of the playground. They already kind of have it laid out. I do like Western States, but then I also, want to go with feel and, you know, working feels as well. So Brightview.
So if we look at Bright Views for 99.6,
Let's look at the,
so let's take a peek at that. That looks really boring to me. If you jump over to the other from Western, that feels balanced. Even though there's no trail and we don't want a trail around the detention area, it just feels, it looks nicer than the other. And they do have a spot, and we'll save 126K so we can put our own play equipment right there. And more walking trails.
But I guess just remember the construction cost is really an estimate at this time, right?
I understand that. Yep.
And that looks like Da Vinci to me.
What's that?
It kind of resembles Da Vinci.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar concept because you've got a combination of hard surface and soft surface trails.
But I think of the cost there a little bit too.
so just to be clear, the price with Brightview includes the playground equipment?
It includes, let me grab their estimate.
No.
And this is for concept one. Am I reading that correctly? So 741,741. So concept for Western
So
is.
they have, they have, in the 741, they've got the natural elements, rocks, tree trunks, those kind of things, but they also have a 5 to 12-year-old play structure for 68,500, and they have lighting included as well in that number, which is about 50,000.
And the reason why I'm asking is we know from historic facts here that the play structures are pretty expensive and they vary from time to time. I mean, we had the park where we were told that it was going to be, you know, one price and then it was double that because of the play structures that were added and maybe there wasn't the original concept wasn't all inclusive of what the cost was. Then we had to come back and decide what we wanted to do with it.
And my guess is for 68,500, that's a really small play structure.
And Ty
It's not
has
a
said
lot of budget.
3 times now that this is only, they're only estimating.
Yep.
So
It's
just going
concept.
from a high level, looking at design concept only, including all financial numbers out, I like that look.
So the one thing I really did like about Brightview in their thing was the concept of trying to tie the main pathway to the river logo that we have. I like that for 2 reasons. One, I think it's it's a cool concept and that maybe just being cheesy, but I really like that. But what I also think that shows is that they were very specifically thinking about Evans. And
Yes.
what does that mean about what they're gonna do if they're awarded the contract? I just feel like that was a really,
I do agree with that. And not only that, this is conceptual. I mean, if we like this, we can just tell them, hey, do something similar to that. I'm just saying.
I think that was kind of Cody's point, right?
Yeah.
If we like certain elements of certain
Exactly.
ones, then
It's not.
when we start to meet with them and bring you guys back some
Right.
preliminary drawings, right, we can talk about those things.
So Tammy, do you have, a preference either way, or any comments or suggestions?
No, the playground equipment and that being included would be a draw for me, but if it's just gonna be like a little putter one, I don't know how much of a draw.
No,
Sorry,
no,
that's,
The library is a good example of that, though. Because we were having a playground in front of the library, and it's some rocks. And
I was gonna say, what playground?
It's like
Yeah.
a little
Yeah.
so,
timing thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah,
so I don't want that to sway a decision.
And I don't want that to be 69,000 either.
yeah.
It's like,
I'm good with whatever y'all choose. The one that goes with the Evans,
that's Brightview.
that one.
The one
Yeah,
that goes with the Evans name. And
Yeah.
again, back to you, Fred, do you have any
Sorry, I can't
preference? Either we're going down the line here, because
I think that Ty's right, they put a lot of extra effort, right, you put a lot of extra thought into what they were planning to match it up with, so. And since it's conceptual, we can certainly, go back to them and say, well, the council prefers this design. You know, what figures can you come up with this design, and then, yeah, quite possibly it's gonna drop and we could still get in a nice playground.
so it sounds like the majority of council would like to go with the Brightview, keeping in mind that this is aesthetically pleasing, and adding whatever comments that we kind of threw at you there, that would be great if we could proceed with that.
Guys okay with that? Sounds like a plan. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Ty.
thanks.
Thank you. Next, we have the wastewater treatment plan expansion, population projection.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem and Council, this is we're nearing 30% completion on the wastewater treatment plant design project for the upcoming expansion project. So what we have is City Engineer Mark Oberschmidt here to guide a conversation on the population projections, which is going to be a critical part of the design as we move through to 30%. We know that the population projections has been a very critical issue through this entire project, something that we have certainly been mindful of and that Mark has conveyed to the design team. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mark and let him guide the rest of this conversation.
Thank you, Cody. Good evening. So yes, we've been working through and reviewing the wastewater utility master plan, looking at the population projections that were included in the plan, and trying to analyze and make sure that we're getting the right population and still keeping in mind the cost of the project and how we're going to phase this project. Because as you remember, we know this project is going to be phased over multiple years. There's going to be a startup phase where we get the organic loading under control, because that's what's driving the design in the first place. We've already exceeded 80% capacity on the organic loading, so we're going into the design phase. When we get to 95% capacity, we have to be in construction. So that's the driving factor on what's making us moving into the design. We're on the hydraulic side, we're 65% capacity. And Robbie will correct me if I misquote or anything, but we're in that range. So from a hydraulic standpoint, the plant is good. So in looking at the population projections, we reviewed the HDR's report, and we looked at how they came up with the final number that they came up with. We agree with the final number with some exceptions. One of the things that HDR took out, in the report, where they didn't include, Arrowhead in the final count, being that Arrowhead would happen in the future, and they didn't think it would happen in the 20-year timeframe. My experience tells me that houses with septic systems that are over 50, 60 years old tend to fail, and then they need to be included in a sewer system. So in order to do that, we need to account for them in the wastewater plant. It'll be separate monies, it'll be a totally separate project, but it needs to be included in that count. So it wasn't included in the projected growth, so we added it on in the additional growth at the end. But we also looked at some of the other things that are being done and what other things that are happening within the growth boundary that we're looking at establishing. Eventually, at some point in the time, as part of this process, we will want to establish a new 208 boundary that establishes what area we're going to service and what area Milliken or other communities would service with, and also considering we're looking at a 20-year time frame. We're not looking at 60 years from now. We can only, so this project will be staged, and we talked about this during the wastewater management plan, in multiple phases. The phasing may change a little bit depending on where we go or what we decide on tonight or in the near future on our final population. As far as what we want to, so if we add, for every 1,000 people we add to that projection, it's going to add cost. We don't know exactly what that cost is because we're not to the point where we know what kind of processes we're going to be using in terms of to treat the organics, to treat the solids eventually, and to eventually expand. Because ultimately, this plant is going to get bigger. In the next 40 years, it'll probably double in size. But for now, it may only a third increase in size. So in the memo that you have in front of you, we projected that the population in 2042 would be approximately 40,300 people. What that's doing currently with our initial modeling that AE2S is doing or has done, it's already adding a fourth train. So out at the plant, for those of you who have done the tour, there's 3 trains. The buildings and everything is plumbed for a fourth train, but that's not something that we talked about or considered during the wastewater master plan. We thought we could do this with process intensification within the existing 3 trains. So we're already talking an additional train, which the one good thing on that is it's already plumbed for that. So that does make it a little bit easier, but it is not cheap. Straight up process intensification would be a whole lot cheaper than having a fourth train. And we also talked both during the master plan and with AE2S to not be on the cutting edge of technology, because with cutting edge technology, or actually we said bleeding edge, with bleeding edge technology, you have to prove it in order to use it. So in other words, we'd have to invest money, and that money, if it didn't work, would be essentially sunk cost. So that's one of the issues that we're trying to maybe not avoid, but consider as we move forward with this population projections. So we're looking at 40,300 as the 2042 population. As we discussed earlier today in a staff meeting, the transportation master plan has a population somewhere in around 41,300 and change, 1,100 more than what we're showing if we round it up to 41,400. But then again, that adds additional cost possibly. So as we balance through this process, we want to take into account that, and I'll let Phil talk about this a little bit more in a second, but what we might be able to accomplish in this initial phase of construction in order to treat the organics and get us more in compliance with the organics. And then down the road, we have a second phase of construction where we deal more with the solids handling. Because that was one of the, if you remember, we had, and I'm going to say ATAD, but autothermal
thermophilic aerobic digestion.
That's the solids. That's the solids handling. When we were talking about the westernmost lagoon of the old plant, we were going to dewater that completely, drain it, and we were going to put a building in the northeast corner of that lagoon, and that was going to handle the solids such that we would have potentially Class A, but most likely Class B biosolids, which then can be hauled away at a lot less cost and easier to deal with after the fact. But that may have to be pushed down the road if we have to spend more money to accomplish the organic loading treatment because of whatever population we decide on. Like I said, if we're already looking at process intensification and a fourth train with the 40,300 that we've set up right now. We add more to that, and we don't know where it's gonna go yet, but it's gonna eventually potentially add, a fifth train would be really costly, because then we have to move the ditch. And then we also have to replumb and add on to some of the existing buildings and potentially, other additional clarifiers, which are the big round things on the east end of the plant. So it is a critical question, and we understand that. I went back after I had a meeting this afternoon with Cody to relook at some of the assumptions that were made in the wastewater utility master plan. And the one that we had already considered is that we're adding Arrowhead back in to the population growth. Dos Rios is also not included in the population growth. But that would have been a separate, that would have gone to a lift station. So that's not in the system right now, but it wasn't included. So that would be an add-on when that part of the city eventually needs to be connected to the public sewer. And we know at some point in time that there is going to be a lift station somewhere in the vicinity of Dos Rios near their entrance to handle some of the flow from the Reamer Lake property that cannot gravity flow into the 49th Street sanitary sewer. So we know that those areas will eventually come in. They need to be accounted for. It's just a matter of when. And like I said, I'm not sure I didn't look and see how old Dos Rios is. I think it's younger than Arrowhead, so it may have a longer lifespan. It may be able to extend past 2042 before those septic systems start to fail. But I'd have to double check on when those were built. But I think those were more 70s and 80s. I don't know if somebody else has been around here longer than me to know that, but
You're right.
whereas Arrowhead was built in the 60s and 70s, so that makes it 50 to 60 years old. So I anticipate those septic systems failing sooner than later. Rather, Dos Rios may not. So there's something to be said about that. So in the memo, there's two populations that you're looking at. The one that we're looking at, from my perspective, is that 40,300 as the 2042 population. The next higher one would be about 41,400 if you take the 2022 master plan for transportation. Again, the trigger is how much that's going to affect not only the ultimate cost of the complete plant, which is going to happen over 10 to 15 years, but also the upfront cost that we need to spend right now in order to treat the organics which are driving the design. So as a point of reference, the state revolving fund has a limit on projects of $18.5 million per project that we can borrow. So if we're looking at $30 million upfront, which is what we were kind of talking about early on, we still need to come up with another $11.5 million. So there's WIFIA money, Water Infrastructure Finance Act, something like that. There's DOLA, and then there's other grants out there that we'll have to start doing research and potentially have AE2S or somebody else, because they have people in-house that do this, find money so that we can finance this project over the life of the project. And considering the fact that whatever we do now, I have to factor in that I'm going to have changes. So we were smart when we built the plant in the first place that we plumbed it for that fourth train, expecting the growth. We just didn't expect it to happen this fast, but it's already plumbed for that. So the piping is already there and we're ready for that. But moving beyond that is a different animal and a different challenge. So as we get through this 30%, and at 30%, we hope to have a good idea on the process treatment from the organic side, especially down the road, potentially on the solids handling side, and then ultimately on the hydraulic loading side that we need to handle in that 2042 timeframe. I know that's a lot, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And Phil here from AE2S he's the technical wizard.
So Mark, a couple of years ago, it was presented to council that we were kind of getting towards a critical number on the usage on our wastewater treatment. I think it was, just tonight you said 80%, but I think it was more than 80%. And now tonight you say we're at 65%. So would you be able to explain, I have an idea of why it went down, but would you be able to explain to the people that maybe haven't been following this, why it would have gone down?
The organic loading is over 80%. So that's what's driving the design. The hydraulic loading is at 65%. So we're hydraulically 2.5 million gallons per day.
2.88 MTB, and we're hovering right around 60%.
So 1.4, 1.3 million gallons per day, in that range. So that's the hydraulic loading, we're okay. That's where I said the 65%. So that's the difference, because the hydraulic is just the liquid flow coming into the plant. And because everybody's using, and it's a good idea, because we live in a desert, the low flow toilets, the low flow faucets, the low flow shower heads, less and less water is going into the system. But the solids coming into the system, the organics coming into the system, from your sinks, from your bathrooms, everywhere, is not changing. So that's increasing. And then back in the day, they used to say the solution to pollution is dilution. That doesn't work so much. But it is what's happening right now. And that's why the loads are going up.
Mark, didn't we have about a 5% drop in, when, Greeley finally got their lift station on board and we took St. Michael's off?
Wasn't it?
It was 3 to 5%, yes, and that's why we're hovering right around that 80%. You take the paper re-rate we did with the state based on actual operating conditions, and then you really put their lift station in service, and it's just kind of, we increased our capacity on paper, and then Greeley took some of that flow away from us. That's how we've been able to just kind of stay right at that 80% mark or just under.
But we have to consider that at some point, the Ashcroft lift station and the T-Bone lift station will flow to us. They don't have another outflow. So that's another thing to consider as we move forward is they will pay, and there's 2 separate IGAs in place for the lift stations. Ultimately, I'd like to have one, so it's just one billing rate for each one. So if they send us a million gallons in 2 days, we bill them for 1 million gallons at a fixed rate. Either one, it doesn't matter, and it's consistent. But the other thing that I would like to broach down and eventually as part of the financing for whatever project expansion we do is that maybe we talk to Greeley about ponying up a small percentage, because they, in the past 2 years, even when the Ashcroft came online, they went online and then they went offline for 3 months. So we got their flow back for 3 months. And then T-Bone went off several times over the last year. And the agreement in place, and there's no way to say, okay, Greeley, you will only send us 200,000 gallons a day. There's no way to say that, because they can't control the flow going to the lift station. But there is a way to maybe help them look at what's happened in the past and figure out how they can not only help financially based on a per 1,000 gallons when it happens, but also potentially as an upfront investment to us as part of the expansion in order so that the city can handle that excess influent that we get from them when those lift stations go down.
So I have 2 things based off of that, though. Is there a way for us to, if it gets to the point where we are stressed with our lift stations and with our wastewater treatment, we already pump some up from the east side. I mean, is there a way to, instead pumping it back to ours, instead pump it to Greeley and have an agreement with Greeley for our wastewater?
Did visit that with Greeley and have just very, very high level conversations. It ultimately came down to dollars. For us it wasn't feasible to divert a portion of our flow from, say, the Evans lift station to Greeley. For us to be able to tie in, it would overtax a lift station that they already have that is pretty much at capacity. They have long range plans to move that lift station and increase its capacity.
If we wanted to help them undertake that project, then it would be feasible for us to send our entire lift station flow there potentially. That project was at a tune of our portion being about 18 million. So if we're gonna dump $18 million worth of capital into somebody's infrastructure, why wouldn't it be ours?
Right, exactly.
Especially at
Well-
11.5.
And for me, it was just exploring which would be more economically feasible for our taxpayers and for our base and everything. So if you've explored that and that's more expensive, then obviously,
Ultimately, not more expensive, it would be, and that was just for their lift station. We didn't approach the buyer of their treatment plant for capacity or monthly fees for actually treating that sewage. That was gonna be our rough buy-in to relocate upsize piping and help them relocate their lift station for their long-range plan. So we didn't get into the capital for their actual treatment plant and then monthly service.
so I think the main part of this conversation is our numbers, our population growth projection, which I have a question then. Why would we not include all of our enclaves that we currently have? I imagine sometime Highland Park probably will be coming on. And
Highland Park is already serviced.
are they already
Yes,
serviced?
Highland
Okay.
Park is serviced, Neville's is serviced. Because the old plant
That would
used
be
to,
right.
the old plant serviced Highland Park to begin with. That's why it was at one point, and if you see it on some maps, it's referred to as the Highland Park plant.
And now that you mention it, that's probably why we always get the trash collection problem with the water bill thing. So I do recognize that now. But anyways, but we have a lot of areas that are county that I think are potentially going to be growth areas for us. So would we not just be including all that anyway?
In the service, when we redefine the service area map, the 208 boundary, it has been defined to the south, essentially down to County Road 46. I think it's as far south as we go. And we had it defined further out to the west, all the way out to County Road 95 or 95th Avenue. Milliken's current boundary comes to Two Rivers or 77. They obviously overlapped, and they currently do. And in the process of finally amending that, we want to define where that ends up. And that's going to be, we'll draw some lines, and we've already created a few exhibits to look at possibilities. And we'll present those to you before we decide to take it anywhere. But our goal is to start that process and then ultimately come to a final service area in total, square miles or acres, whatever you want to do, and then look at that. And the population projections are just a projection of growth. The density may vary. So that's the other thing is, how do you look at a quarter section parcel and you put 4 units per acre on it, you get this much. But the 4 units per acre used to be the lay of the land back in the day, but now value of land's gone up, so people are looking at 6, 8, 10, 12 units per acre, depending on what they're building.
And we're being forced now to consider ADUs, regardless of how we feel about it.
That's another item which
Another-
we have no control over, and
Right.
the only way we can seriously control that would be to define the lot size. Because ADUs are restricted. You can only put so much on a lot if it's a small lot. But then when you increase the density by doing that, so that's a backhanded slap to you, because you try to skip the ADU and then you got more lots. So you end up with a still smaller thing. So again, we're in that 40,000 range is what we're looking at in terms of population. We haven't run the numbers to see enough to see what, for every 1,000, what does that do to the model? And again, the models we've set up, how many, 3 different models for different processes?
We've modeled, I think, about 6 different technologies right now. The initial results actually indicate pushing more towards the bleeding edge is producing better effluent quality and smaller footprint, but that is a technology that is not currently on CDPHE's approved list, and so it's a different pathway to approval. I think, you know, we just did an updated model run on some of the approved technologies, being IFAS, so integrated fixed film activated sludge, and membrane bioreactor, MBR. And we're seeing that on the 40,300 and including the autothermal thermophilic aerobic digestion step with its return flows that come back, that we're pushing the 4 basins with process intensification to be able to accommodate that loading and looking at effluent water quality goals that are currently in line with what you're currently doing on CDPHE policy 17, which is total inorganic nitrogen limits and total phosphorus limits. Further down the line, it looks like water quality effluent goals are going to get rewritten when Regulation 31 becomes established, and they're going to start regulating on ammonia and total nitrogen, which is going to drive those parameters down even further, which means you need more treatment capacity. So depending upon where you want to align on the goals is going to start kind of frameworking some of the conversations around what technology do we select and go with. The problem with technology is it's always changing. The new widget's always coming out, so you kind of got to do your best homework now and figure out where you want to head. But those are some of the preliminary numbers that we're looking at. You know, we've another 1,000 people. Does that push us into a 5th train? I can't say that. We would have to, you know, do the update. I don't perceive that as being a huge increase in jump, but it's something that we would need to look at. I can share, and it's my feeling that right now with the approved technologies in 4 basins, we're kind of at the limits of what it can do right now.
So in other words, looking at the phasing, like I said, the phasing may be driven by what technology we start with, so that down the road, and I'm going to say this very simplistically, it's plug and play. We just repeat and rinse.
So one concept that's there in a way to help mitigate that is to hold off on doing the solids portion or the ATAD portion. If we delay that, we automatically cut out those return flows and loads that are coming back to the process, or we can look at what's called a side stream treatment process. So what that is the flows that are coming off of the ATAD process, we treat in another step before it goes back into your main basin. So it reduces the load coming in. It's another step, it's another process, it's costs.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of balancing all that and figuring out the pathway from where we're at now with your population projections that you want to kind of look at, and where do we need to be to get to the 20-year numbers.
Does anybody have any other questions?
We have to be, I'm just trying to remember from other presentations, at a specific percentage, right, below in order for us not to be out of compliance of some sort, if I recall. Because I know I keep on hearing the 80%, but you can only be at a specific capacity before people come in and start letting us know that we need to expand. So it was for the expansion component, right?
So CDPHE's regulations, I believe it's, I think it's Site Application Regulation 22, which is where the actual permitted capacity of your facility is written out. You're permitted on hydraulic capacity, so that's the liquid flow through the plant, and organic capacity. And organic capacity is all the solids. It's BOD, so biological oxygen demand, and that includes your ammonia or nitrogen sources as well as your phosphorus sources. So you're permitted on both organic and hydraulic capacity for your facility. And CDPHE's rules and regulations stipulate that once you hit 80% of your rated capacity for either organic or hydraulic loading, you must begin the design process. Once you hit 95% loading of either of those two parameters, you must be in construction.
So with any of these methods that you mentioned, if we were to reduce below that 80%, that buys us time, correct, for expansion?
Yeah, if we told everybody in Evans to stop putting things down their sink other than water, we might reduce the load, but that's not gonna happen.
Well, I'm just curious if we were to, put, because I know we talked about a specific thing, which I don't recall the name, that would help bring down, create more capacity. And it was, at the time, I think it was 5 million? I don't know how much.
That was the paper re-rating that we did.
Yeah, okay.
And you can speak more to that because you were more active.
It gave us, the paper re-rating gave us about 10% more capacity.
For capacity, okay.
We added an extra 600 pounds, brought us from 6,024 to 6,600.
But it doesn't matter if it's just one area, it has to be both at the same time.
No,
Dividing,
so it needs to be one or the other. So the
Okay.
the paper re-rating, what they did is they went through and used the plant's operating data along with mathematical calculations to demonstrate that what was actually constructed could treat more organic loading than what it was originally designed at. And so that's how the capacity was actually increased, the rated capacity by CDPHE.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay. I'm just trying to go back in time with all the information, amazing information you've given us, and recall it all for now. So, okay.
Ally, we're not bringing back porta potties.
I am not going to the 1980s, okay? I'm going from recent.
You guys have any more questions?
It was-
We don't have a crystal ball, but your numbers look good, the math looks good.
I do also want to know, I do
Hard to
notice.
kind of guess that, but
And
without
it
seeing
is,
something
it
in the
is,
future, I mean, we could have,
yeah,
but-
it is, we're gonna dial it in and, put together in the final report what, after our discussions this afternoon, I went back and looked at a couple of things, and that's when I noticed that those Rios, and like I said, that one's could not fall into the 2042 timeframe, because they're newer houses. So I'm gonna go double check when they were built.
70s.
70s, those Rios?
Yeah.
Okay, so then they may be pushing a limit as well, but 70s would be 50 years old, so,
I looked them up.
but even with Arrowhead in there, you're at 40,240.
yeah, so,
You're at 40,300, so.
so it is a matter of, like Phil said, if we take the solids handling out, because that was, if you remember, when we did the master plan, the solids handling was gonna be the largest chunk of the cost.
Right.
Because at the time, we thought it was strictly gonna be process intensification. Well, now that we're adding a fourth train plus process intensification within the existing system, that cost may balance out. We don't know yet, but, so if I take the ATAD, I'm just gonna use the acronym, even though I hate to say it. Take that off the table for now, because I think, weren't they saying that was gonna be like 20, well, off for net right now?
Our current solids treatment is adequately undersized and never should have been approved by CDPHE. Does not come anywhere close to meeting design criteria.
Oh, okay.
So we can't start putting more solids into something that doesn't meet
Beat the criteria.
Oh, okay.
design criteria.
It would have to have some.
Some improvement, but not the full blown. Or we phase it in of some kind.
It's probably gonna be all or nothing.
I think where we're at is we need to kind of decide on our population number and look at what is the best that we can do for treatment capacity for the liquid side and what we would couple with the solid side, and figure out what that cost is, so we can start making some decisions about how we approach kind of.
I do see in the notes here that 3.1, it's a little large, because I know we were kind of really discussing that number, just because in the past it was super low, and that's the reason why we're here, in part,
What was the previous number, remind me?
it was like
One-
1.97.
1.4 was the original gross in that range. It was a mixture of 0.5% and 2%, depending on the area of the city. And it averaged out to be about a 1.4. One of the other projections that was done in the design phase but wasn't used was a little over 2%. which is the number, if we take the population projections that we're looking at between now and 2042, and you look at that number and you straight line grade it between the two, we're looking at like a 2.2, 2.4% growth. So that's why we think that original total service population of 39.8, and then we added in Arrowhead to get us to 40,300. That's the number so that's why we're looking at that 40,300 as the population to go with. And we're gonna dial this in and nail it down, because we wanna put it, and confirm with these guys so that they feel comfortable with it, so I feel comfortable with it. So when we present it to you guys, when we get to the next phase, we're all comfortable with it, so that it's documented adequately and been researched and triple checked, so that we know that we get the best crystal ball we have at this point in time. It is, and I'm not gonna say it's better than a shot in the dark,
It is.
but it is, we're looking at all the different, demographics, all the different projections from Weld County, the state demographer's office, our master plans, and looking at those numbers and say, okay. And then also looking at the growth around us and taking into account what's happening in other communities and how they're growing. And as we go with the different changes, another thing that impacts is our fees. As we change fees, it changes. So we're in the middle on those level, and of course, we're on the mill levy, we're on the low end, so people are still coming here. So that's gonna drive what we get. And another big player is water availability. It doesn't matter if we don't have the water. And so NISP is still coming, but we don't know when that's gonna happen. So that's gonna be a driver as well. And one of the other projections that in Weld County had was the growth in Weld County was gonna tail off over the next 15 years. So you might get 2.7, 2.8, and then it might go down to 2.4, 2.2, and then into the ones. And that potentially because if the water happens or not. Because if the water's not here, we can't sustain the growth.
And I do see that here, that you start at 2.2 and then taper it down, in these,
Yeah, one of the
charts
tables,
that you-
yeah, we looked
Yeah,
at.
that you have. So that concerns me, just because, I mean, I get what you're stating, but I think we also need to look at like how things are gonna shift. Like, are ADUs gonna be, something in the future? We're starting to see, not in single family homes, not just a single family. There's like more people living in them, like 3 families. What does that density within a home look like for our infrastructure as well? And then also, the population growth. And this area, regardless of anything, it continues to grow. But then also, just looking at it from our city standpoint, how have we been growing year after year? At what percentage as well? And then, I don't know, just seeing all those different rates and figuring out what the best number looks like for us here.
Well, and it does, like in the early 2000s, we had 4 to 6 to 8% growth. And then after the 2009, it dropped down to almost nothing. And then it started to pick up in the last 3 years. So now we're up in that 2 to 3% range on an annual basis. And the developers are still looking to come here. We've got Basler doing their 700 plus units, and they have another parcel that they want to do. Vector's come in with their project. Peakview is still on standstill at this point in time, but that's 1,100 potential units, depending on what they do with that.
And then Crest, yeah. Crest.
So I think 40,000 to 40,300 is a good range. If we go any higher, we might be pushing ourselves into a next train, which means I got to move the ditch and a few other things. So it does add cost. The big thing is, as we design this, and I think the plant, and Robbie has a great plant. The design and the operations of that plant is phenomenal. And it was thought out to the point that they knew it was going to have to expand, so at least they planned for that initial expansion. It just wasn't planned for the second initial expansion. So we're going to try to maybe get that far, but it really depends on, number one, can we find the funding to do what we need to do in the near term, in the next 5 years, but also plan for the next 10 to 15 years.
So before I make a wrapping up comment, Chris, Tammy, Fred, do you have anything that you would like to ask or get clarified with regards? Get you, Fred, go ahead.
Okay. When was the 442 set in the IGA? What year was that? 2011
Which, the IGA for
for the lift station?
T-Bone? You know, Robbie?
T-Bone was, I believe, 2011 sounds right. 442 is actually for the St. Michael's lift station. Unfortunately, T-Bone is lower than that. We tied the amount for the St. Michael's lift station, that was the 2021, 2022 IGA, to our Class 2 commercial rate. Unfortunately, a year later, we revamped our sewer rate structure and we only had one commercial rate. But we were very specific in there that is tied to our Class 2 commercial rate, which at the time, before we revamped the rate structure, was $4.42. That is the primary driver for wanting to revisit that IGA and lump T-Bone into it, because it has a set rate, I believe it's $3.34 or something along those lines per 1,000 gallons.
So that's part of the reasoning for having one IGA for both, using, and not tying it to a fixed rate structure, but just to a fixed dollar amount per 1,000, and then adjusting that on an annual basis for inflation.
I agree with that.
That makes it a little easier, so if our fee structure changes in the future,
Yeah.
we're not stuck with something that doesn't exist anymore.
Let's see. Well, the fact that we've had multiple exceeded the delivery rates through that IGA, that concerns me. The other thing I need to say is I have absolutely utmost confidence in Mark, even though I tease him a lot about certain things, and also Robbie. But I have absolutely no faith in the state demographer. When she was on that Zoom call a few years ago and insisted that population growth was still at 1 point something, and then I think it was less than 2 weeks later, here's the news touting that Weld County had a 30% population increase, and it was one of the fastest growing counties in the United States. So I'm still wanting to look at more than three people per household as a population growth index. So, I'm gonna try to take and look through some of this paperwork with the population projections that you guys have done, and try to come up with some kind of acceptance for a lower figure. But right now, I still think that relying on the state demographic for data is total garbage.
Yeah, that was on the low end for sure. And that but we wanted to look at all the data that's out there to see what the comparisons are, and then, see what other communities are doing as well. But it's not perfect. But we're trying to make sure that we're a little more conservative this time than we were the last time. And hopefully that gets us where we need to be. But again, as we process the design, these guys are going to be thinking about, okay, if this is what it is now, how do we make it expandable as simply as possible in the future? And we know that in the future, when we start moving south into the old lagoons, that the ditch is going to have to get moved and piped. So that'll be part of the thing we have to consider as we move forward. And then there's a possibility at this point in time, we're staying within the physical fence of the property at this point, but in 30, 40 years from now, we might have to buy the property east of us and do some expansion there, or west of us, sorry. That's a possibility, because there's nowhere else to go, and the land's available. It's not being used other than for storage mostly. So it is a possibility, but again, that'll be a new permitting process that we have to go through. The other thing is we're trying to, as we go through this permit process, is to keep the permit as simple as possible, because CDPHE is overworked and understaffed right now. So that process is gonna take a while, so that's one of the risks we're taking into effect as we start planning our design.
Is that one of the reasons why some of the new technology hasn't been certified by them?
Possibly, but I think one of that is some of that new technology, in order to certify it, it still has to be pilot tested by somebody. And being a guinea pig can be pretty expensive. So that's why we were trying to stay away from the bleeding edge, but
It's the build it and they will come.
Yeah.
You gotta prove it works to them, so you have to build it and prove it to them that it works for them to actually certify.
There's some technologies out there that are still, I'll say, near their infancy and don't have a very long track record. There's another set of newer technologies that have been around a little bit longer, have a little bit more track record, but they're not in CDPHE's accepted criteria yet, because they only update that criteria every so often, right? So there's a bit of a gray area there that we can consider. It just depends on, what Robbie's comfortable with operating and where conversations may lead with CDPG about being able to permit some of those facilities and what their treatment capacity would be.
Anybody else have any more questions?
Just a comment. I'm glad you guys did the math. But the math looks good.
Right. So I think it's really important for us to be able to plan for what we can afford and what's the most growth that we can afford to do. And if you guys are pretty confident, and I appreciate your due diligence and figuring this out, that the 40,300 is what we can afford to do and adequate for our growth projections, then I guess we'll be sitting here looking forward to the next phase and appreciate all the information that you are giving us.
I get to look at his model next. That's gonna be fun. He's gonna have to walk me through it.
All right,
Thank you for the feedback.
thank you. Thanks for coming and
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
having a Alright.
flashback to college algebra.
it's 6:43, and unless Cody has something else for us that we need to discuss, we can take a 17-minute break and begin our regular meeting at 7 o'clock. Sweet.